With birthright citizenship, anybody born in the United States automatically becomes an American citizen. President-elect Donald Trump says he wants to do away with birthright citizenship, which has been in place since after the Civil War. Joining us now is attorney Stephen Montoya from Montoya, Lucero, and Pastor, PA. Welcome back to Arizona Horizon, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So let's have a brief history lesson then. When and why did birthright citizenship come about in the U.S.?
Well, it really came about before the United States became a country, because birthright citizenship was part of the early American heritage, because America was a colony of England. And England had birthright citizenship since at least the early 1600s. A case called Calvin's case was decided that said that anyone born in the king's reign owed allegiance to the king, and therefore a Scotsman who was under the King of England, King James II, had to be considered an Englishman for purposes of citizenship and could own land in England. The early colonies all adopted birthright citizenship. It was repudiated, at least as to African Americans who were enslaved, in the 1857 case of Dred Scott versus Sanford, the infamous case. And then it was reversed, that case, specifically by a couple of things, one of which was the American Civil War. And then it was also reversed by the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery in 1865. Mm-hmm. And then the 14th Amendment defined citizenship constitutionally in Section 1, and it basically states that everyone born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is a citizen of the state they were born in and a citizen of the United States.
Well, then that brings us to how challenging, how difficult, just how controversial would it be to actually carry this out? Would it mean amending the Constitution if President-elect Trump and some of his friends wanted to make this happen?
It's going to be very controversial. It's going to be, the so-called liberals are against it. A lot of the conservatives are against it too. Birthright citizenship is part of the heritage of the United States, as I pointed out. Mm-hmm. And a lot of conservative jurists are textualists. They believe that you have to take the words of the Constitution very strictly. You've heard of the term strict constructionists. Absolutely, yes. And the 14th Amendment, the first sentence says, anyone born in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction is a citizen of the United States. And it's going to be hard to get around that. Here's the argument, though, that you don't have to amend the Constitution because, in fact, Congress can statutorily say that the children of undocumented immigrants are not citizens of the United States because not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States in the first sentence of the First Amendment has a special meaning in this context. And in order to have jurisdiction in this particular context, it's not the traditional meaning of jurisdiction that first-year law students learn, right, and third-year law students learn, and lawyers apply every day. It's something different. It means political jurisdiction. Can you vote? Can you run for office? The problem with that is it flies in the face of the language of the 14th Amendment, but moreover, it flies in the face of the history of the amendment. Because when you look at the drafting of the amendment, the drafters of the amendment actually considered this and said, hey, and there was a threat. A Pennsylvania senator said, hey, we're going to be overrun by the Chinese. They're trespassing. We don't want their children to be citizens, do we? And the majority of the Senate said, yes, we do, and enacted the 14th Amendment that was lawfully ratified by 3/4 of the states.
Well, in our current politics, though, we know that President Trump during his first term was advocating for something like this as well. And some people are nervous that during the first term, even though there were some things that happened that people didn't like, there were more guardrails, there were more checks and balances. There's a concern that maybe those who would have talked President Trump out of it, even in his own cabinet, may not be there right now. Do you think there will be a legitimate effort, as difficult as it may be to pull it off, will there be a legitimate effort to have this happen? Will they actually put the energy into it?
Well, I wouldn't call it a legitimate effort, but I do think there's going to be an effort, and I'll tell you why. Because if you Google this, which I have this morning, there are literally dozens of separate pronouncements by President-elect Trump that he's going to do this on the first day. And I believe him. I don't think it's going to get very far after his pronouncement, but he can issue executive orders. For example, he can order customs and not to give anyone a passport, a U.S. passport, unless they can show not only that they were born in the United States, but their parents were lawfully in the United States. He can actually impose some of this by means of an executive order that will be immediately challenged in the courts, and I think enjoined from enforcement by the courts, and it could go all the way up to the Supreme Court.
How does this potentially complicate the idea that we've heard both sides of the aisle actually say nice things about so-called dreamers? How does it affect their plight? Because this would seem like President-elect Trump is not going to be their advocate.
Well, he is not going to be their advocate. He has never been their advocate. And it is definitely going to have an adverse impact on dreamers who are in an extremely precarious position in any event. The only thing that's going to save the dreamers in the long run is an act of Congress naturalizing them. And whether that's going to come, your guess is probably better than mine.
Yeah. We're down to less than a minute, so I want to ask you just a philosophical question.
Sure.
As someone who's heard about this for years, even potentially lawsuits related to this sort of thing.
I prepared a lawsuit against a potential bill like this in Arizona in the 90s.
Yeah. So, without knowing the answer
when I was still young.
Well, neither one of us are psychologists here, but briefly, why does this keep coming up?
Well, fear of the other is a constant in American history. It's a constant in life. The Alien and Sedition Act of the early republic under a founding father named John Adams was pitting us against the French. The French and the Spanish were conspiring against the Anglo-Saxon American founders. So the fear of the other, the fear of the unknown is a constant in life and history.
The human condition. Stephen Montoya, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir.